This is a CBS News special report. I'm Tony DeCopel. The Supreme Court has just handed down a second major decision this morning, this one on birthright citizenship, long considered a right in this country. Put simply, it means that if you were born here in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. President Trump had tried to change that via executive order, arguing that children of people here illegally or temporarily are not automatic citizens. And the case had been so important to the president that he actually watched the arguments in person, the first sitting president to do that. And now we have a ruling. So let's go back to our CBS News chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford, who's reading through the ruling hot off the presses. Jan, good morning. How did the court decide?
Emphatically rejecting the president's attempt with an executive order to redefine what it means to be a citizen in this country. The idea, the long-held belief that if you're born here on U.S. soil, you're a U.S. citizen. The opinion by Chief Justice John Roberts says that the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Clause, makes very clear that if you're born here, that long-held understanding that you're a U.S. citizen. The president had argued that Congress and the country had ratified that provision because it was concerned about giving citizenship to former enslaved people and their descendants, and not to the some 250,000, I think, babies born here every year to people who are here illegally or temporarily. He wanted to carve that out and end that, say that citizenship would only apply to people who are here lawfully, who are domiciled here. The justices today rejecting those efforts by the president with the stroke of a pen to redefine what it means to be a citizen. This was a
Supreme Court has just wrapped up its final session of the summer, and what happened inside the courtroom should send a chill through the entire country, because in one of the most important rulings of the term, the court upheld birthright citizenship by a razor-thin 5-4 decision. That means the constitutional guarantee that anyone born in American soil is an American citizen survived, but only barely.
To be a citizen. This was a surprisingly narrowly divided decision, Tony. After the argument, I think a lot of us thought that it might be 7-2, that there might be more consensus around this argument. But that part of the decision, the main decision, the constitutional aspect of it, which means this closes off this issue. Congress can't come in and try to change it. That was only 5-4, with the Chief Justice, the 3 liberal justices, and Trump appointee Amy Coney Barrett agreeing that the Constitution foreclosed this option for the president or Congress. Now, Justice Kavanaugh has a dissenting opinion, and he agrees that a separate federal law could apply here, but he is not going along with the Constitution, with the court on the constitutional issue. The 3 more conservative justices are all in dissent. So again, 5-4 on the constitutional issue, 6-3, it looks like, with the statute. And again, I'm trying to do the math. We're going to go back and read through some of these dissents right now. But the 3 conservatives, the most conservative justices, Thomas Alito and Justice Gorsuch, also in a sharp dissent, Tony.
All right, Jan, I'll let you go back.
Into the 14th Amendment, a principle that has defined American citizenship for generations, came within one vote of being thrown into chaos. President Trump had tried to end birthright citizenship through an executive order, not through a constitutional amendment, not through the long and difficult process required to change the Constitution, just by executive power. And the court said no. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion, joined by Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Barrett, and Jackson. But Justices Thomas Alito and Gorsuch dissented. And that is what makes this
dissent, Tony.
All right, Jan, I'll let you go back into the text. And meanwhile, I'll bring in Jessica Levinson, our CBS News legal contributor and Loyola law professor. Jessica, thank you for being back with us. You know, when Jan and I were talking about what could be in this decision ahead of time, we talked about whether they would rule on the constitutionality or they would go to statute, federal law. It seems like they went further, going to the constitutionality. Is that a stronger rejection than anticipated?
Maybe not than anticipated, but it certainly is a stronger rejection, because what a majority of the court is saying is that Congress cannot go along with what President Trump tried to do by executive order on his first day. So it's foreclosing the ability of Congress to try and redefine birthright citizenship. A decision based on the Constitution means there's really only two things that could change the court's current understanding. And again, what's that understanding? If you're born on U.S. soil, you are a U.S. citizen. We don't look at the status of your parents. We don't look if they're here legally or illegally. We don't look to see if they're here temporarily or not. So what does it mean to have a constitutional decision? It means, again, there's two ways to change it. The court can change its mind later, can overrule itself, or there can be a constitutional amendment. But it forecloses the ability for Congress to say, we think there's something in there. We like what the president did by executive order. Let's now adopt that.
Because these are the same justices who constantly describe themselves as strict constitutionalists. They say they believe in the text. They say they believe in original meaning. They say they believe presidents cannot simply rewrite the law when they feel like it. But when the issue became Trump's immigration agenda, suddenly that strict constitutionalism seems to disappear, and Trump's reaction towards everything. Instead of accepting that the Constitution cannot be changed by executive order, Trump immediately claimed that Congress could simply pass legislation to end birthright citizenship. He said no long complicated constitutional amendment would be necessary. He told Republicans to start working on it right away and promised them his full support. But that is not how the law works. Birthright citizenship is rooted in the 14th Amendment. If Trump wants to remove it, he cannot just ask Congress to pass a normal bill. He would need a constitutional amendment. That means 2/3 of both chambers of Congress and 3/4 of the states would have to agree. That's an extremely high bar for a reason. The Constitution is not supposed to change every time one president
adopt that.
Jessica, thank you very much. I want to turn now to our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett. Major, during oral arguments back in April on this case, there was a notable exchange between John Roberts and the attorney representing Sauer, representing the United States. He said it's a whole new world, and John Roberts said, yeah, but it's the same old Constitution.
Precisely. And what President Trump has tried to do is take what was many years ago a fringy novel theory that what the 14th Amendment said did not apply to people who were in this country without documentation or temporarily because they were not subject to the jurisdiction of our country in the way enslaved people were in 1868 when the 14th Amendment was ratified, or in 1940 when Congress put a legal statute around that general idea. And when you become president of the United States, Tony, you can take what were novel and fringe theories and make them an issue before the Supreme Court. And President Trump has done precisely that under the broad umbrella of strong political support for his restrictive immigration policies, both at the border and internally. This is a direct outgrowth of that entire philosophy that this country needs a stricter set of attitudes and legal application of its existing immigration law, and where that law doesn't exist, perhaps it needs a redefinition of it. And President Trump tried to redefine what the Constitution meant in 1868 and what a subsequent federal law meant. He was unsuccessful in that, but it nevertheless goes to the underlying and long-running political potency for this president, and before that, a candidate, Donald Trump, and the broad issue of immigration in this country.
But
Major,
Trump does not seem to care about that. His response was not about law, it was about power. It was about finding another way around a constitutional limit after the court refused to hand him what he wanted. And of course, Stephen Miller responded exactly the way everyone expected. He called the ruling one of the most destructive decisions in Supreme Court history and claimed that American citizenship does not belong to the world.
Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller says, Stephen, how'd you feel when you saw the decision come down?
Well, I had two feelings. First, the fact that it was 5-4 so agonizingly close just underscored that the legal community on the right and left has been so wrong for so many years, saying this was going to be a 9-0 ruling against President Trump. The heartbreaking part of this is thinking about what it means for America over the long term. Well, the short term and the long term. Look, President Trump won some massive, unprecedented victories with the Supreme Court, like the Haitian TPS ruling, the asylum ruling, the slaughter ruling, giving him unfettered authority to terminate federal bureaucrats. But this is absolutely a deep knife wound in the heart of the American Republic. Look, Jesse, I can step tomorrow onto the deck of a 747. It does not mean that I am the pilot of that plane and I'm qualified to fly it. Just physically being on U.S. soil does not make you a citizen or qualified to carry on or capable of executing the inheritance of this country. We have people from all over the world, from third world nations, nations that on their own would have never invented the wheel, let alone modern technology, let alone medicine, let alone air travel. And they can just come into the country, have a baby at a hospital, paid for by you and me, and then that baby's automatically a citizen. That baby can sit on a jury when he turns 18 and sit in judgment of you, and sit in judgment of me, and sit in judgment of our loved ones, can decide who our mayors are, our governors are, our presidents are. Citizenship means nothing if it is open to everyone. The idea that you can have a cruise ship filled with foreigners and they just dock at a port for an hour and someone has a baby, Jesse, the baby's an American citizen. They can vote in every election for the rest of their lives. They can be living in a foreign country and cashing welfare checks from American citizens. Look, I know that
Here is the reality. If you are born in the United States, the Constitution says you are a citizen. That is not a slogan. That is not a political talking point. That is the text of the 14th Amendment. That is why the 5-4 ruling feels so dangerous. Yes, Trump lost this round. Yes, birthright citizenship survived. But the country was one vote away from a constitutional crisis. And that was not the only major ruling.
The Supreme Court has upheld state laws barring transgender girls and women from competing on high school and college sports teams in another setback for transgender rights. The court has repeatedly ruled against transgender people in the past year, and the latest ruling found that laws in Idaho and West Virginia do not violate either the Constitution or the federal law known as Title IX that bars discrimination in education. There are about 24 other Republican-led states with similar laws, and it seems likely that the decision will extend to those laws as well. Left unresolved by this decision are lawsuits in California, Connecticut, and elsewhere, where transgender girls and women are allowed to compete consistent with their gender identity.
In another decision, the Supreme Court allows state bans preventing transgender girls and women from competing on female school sports teams. The court ruled that schools may separate boys and girls teams based on biological sex under Title IX. For the right, this was celebrated as a major cultural war victory, but the actual number of transgender athletes affected is incredibly small. Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, testified in 2024 that he knew of fewer than 10 transgender college student athletes among all NCAA competitors. So ask yourself, if the numbers are that small, why has this issue become such a massive political
considered a right in this country? Put simply, it means that if you were born here in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. President Trump had tried to change that via executive order, arguing that children of people here illegally or temporarily are not automatic citizens. And the case had been so important to the president that he actually watched the arguments in person, the first sitting president to do that. And now we have a ruling. So let's go back to our CBS News chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford, who's reading through the ruling hot off the presses. Jan, good morning. How did the court decide?
emphatically rejecting the president's attempt with an executive order to redefine what it means to be a citizen in this country. The idea, the long-held belief that if you're born here on U.S. soil, you're a U.S. citizen. The opinion by Chief Justice John Roberts says that the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Clause, makes very clear that if you're born here, that long-held understanding that you're a U.S. citizen. The president had argued that Congress and the country had ratified that provision because it was concerned about giving citizenship to former enslaved people and their descendants, and not to the 250,000, I think, babies born here every year to people who are here illegally or temporarily. He wanted to carve that out and end that, say that citizenship would only apply to people who are here lawfully, who are domiciled here. The justices today rejecting those efforts by the president with the stroke of a pen to read.
This was never really about sports. It was about turning a tiny, vulnerable group of people into a national target. It was about creating fear, outrage, and division. It was about giving politicians another cultural war weapon. And when MAGA celebrates, real people are being pushed further to the margins. Young people who already face hostility are now watching the highest court in the country tell states they can exclude them. That is why this ruling matters, not because there is some massive wave of transgender athletes changing school sports across America. There is not. It matters because the court just gave political cover to a campaign of demonization.
24/7 that the Trump administration is logging another win when it comes to a case that had to do with the National Republican Senatorial Committee versus the Federal Election Commission. This is a ruling on campaign financing, and Ed, as you pointed out, the Supreme Court does appear to have ruled on that campaign finance restriction clause, and it is, again, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, no, this is a big one. This is something that, in essence, reinforces and may actually embolden the power of political parties. Remember, there's the Democratic National Committee, there's the Republican National Committee. And then each of those entities has other committees that are responsible for electing people to the House and to the Senate. So the Republicans call theirs the NRCC and the NRSC. The DCCC, DCCC, and the DSCC. And these two entities, especially in years where it's just midterms, are raising tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, but they can't spend it directly or in coordination with candidates. Republicans had argued that they should be allowed to do that, especially in the age of super PACs, that if you're going to have these entities set up, why not allow the political parties to coordinate directly with the candidate that they are, and to advertise with or on behalf of candidates that they are nominating and supporting? Why put up that barrier? And so the big difference to anyone watching or listening right now is only this. You will continue to see political advertising digitally and on the air. What will change is the fine print at the bottom and who exactly is paying for that advertising and how much they're paying.
Because the other thing, the third major decision, and this one may reshape American politics in an even deeper way. The Supreme Court ruled that political parties can spend unlimited amount of money in coordination with their candidates. In plain language, this gives wealthy donors even more influence over elections. Think about what that means. A billionaire can pour enormous money into a political party, and that party can then coordinate spending with candidates in key races. That turns parties into giant political banks. It gives donors more leverage. It gives candidates more incentive to follow the agenda of whoever controls the money. Justice Kagan warned that the court was reopening the door to the same kind of quid pro quo corruption that campaign finance limits were designed to prevent. And she is right, because when money becomes speech, the people with the most money get the loudest voice. Ordinary voters get drowned out. Working families get pushed aside. The wealthy do not just influence politics. They begin to shape the rules of the entire country.
Can do the same. From a political standpoint, this immediately benefits Republicans this year, because while Democratic candidates are really good at raising money themselves for their campaigns. Republican candidates haven't been as good at that in more recent history, but their political organizations, the super PACs and the parties, are very good at it. So now that money can be funneled right into candidates, and it sort of eliminates the arguments about who's doing better at raising money, if in essence you can be taking money now from your political party and don't have to just raise it yourself. So this changes potentially the contours, especially of congressional races across the country, and certainly just reinforces the power that money continues to have over our elections, especially the handful. And really at this point we're dealing with fewer than 24 competitive House races across the country, where now the two parties can coordinate a lot faster and spend much more on those candidates.
Trump naturally celebrated the ruling. He called it a big win for Republicans and for the First Amendment. But for millions of Americans, this does not feel like free speech. It feels like the rich buying a larger microphone while everyone else is told to whisper. So when you look at all three rulings together, the picture is disturbing. Birthright citizenship survived, but only by one vote. Transgender Americans were dealt another blow, and billionaire money just gained even more power in politics. This was not just another day at Supreme Court. This was a warning. The Constitution survived one battle, but the fight over democracy, equality, and political power is far from over.